Good morning. The 9,885th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's provisional rules of procedure, and invite the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Jordan, Qatar, and the Syrian Arab Republic and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's provisional rules of procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria; Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator; and Ms. Jomana Saif, co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement and legal advisor at the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda, and I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is less than 4 months since the fall of the former Syrian regime and the opening of a new era in Syria's history. The legacies of 14 years of war and conflict and 5 decades of one-man rule are huge. So are the immediate challenges facing the Syrians today. The great hopes and huge fears of the Syrian people have been starkly laid bare this past month. Many rejoiced at being able to gather in public spaces without fear to mark the events of 14 years ago, and more recently, many were able to openly celebrate Nowruz. But, Mr. President, many others faced a harrowing episode of devastating violence on the coast, resulting in mass civilian casualties and heightening fear and anxiety in many quarters about the future. Let me turn to this immediately. On Thursday, March 6, armed groups associated with the former regime attacked and ambushed caretaker authority forces across the coastal region. Reports indicate attacks on military and internal security targets and also several hospitals. The scale and sophistication of the attacks were striking, with many claimed by groups of former regime officers. The caretaker authorities have claimed influence from external actors too. That same day, Mr. President, forces streamed into the coastal coast from other parts of Syria, including forces under the control of or affiliated or at least nominally associated with the caretaker Ministry of Defense, including foreign fighters, and on affiliated groups taking up arms spontaneously. Serious armed confrontations ensued, resulting in significant numbers of casualties among the warring factions. But far more disturbing was the appalling civilian death toll, including widespread summary killings of civilians and unarmed individuals, including accounts of entire families executed at point blank and widespread footage of grave violations of a plainly sectarian and retaliatory nature, singling out Alawites. The situation was comparatively calmed after several days. However, we continue to receive reports of harassment and intimidation, including with heavy sectarian overtones. There have been reports of reinforcement of security presence in the area. Meanwhile, a leader of former regime remnants has issued a video vowing to continue the fight. Mr. President, the coordinated attack on the caretaker authority, the heavy counterattacks against this, and the mass killing of civilians all came against the background of already fomenting insecurity on the coast, marked by multiple reports of killings by unidentified perpetrators, looting, and kidnapping. And there was a broader context of hate speech and misinformation before, during, and after the events. There was a sense of exclusion from the transition and the public sector, and there were pent-up grievances and anger towards persons associated with the former regime. Mr. President, I welcome the clear condemnation by the Security Council and its reaction to these events. Further investigation is needed to fully determine the perpetrators of the shocking violence against civilians. For their part, the caretaker authorities have stated that civilians were killed by forces on both sides, including by what they acknowledge were some volunteer and other associated factions. They announced an independent investigative committee tasked with examining violation by all sides and submitting its finding within 30 days. In my dialogue with the caretaker authorities, I have stressed the importance of investigations being effective, transparent, independent, and comprehensive, in line with international standards, and that witnesses are not intimidated and that they are protected. Findings need to be made public and those responsible held accountable, with a clear signal that the era of impunity in Syria is in the past. The committee met with my team in Damascus 2 days ago, and its members are engaging with the relevant UN bodies, which all stand ready to support. The caretaker authorities also announced the formation of a High Commission for Civil Peace in the coastal region. The need to repair deep sectarian fractures and mistrust is huge, and their work alone will not be sufficient. They need to associate the many Syrian civil society organizations who play a crucial role in local dialogue and vital peace-building efforts. And we, for our part, have been active in facilitating needed contacts to try to contain the aftermath and build a modicum of trust. Mr. President, on 10th March, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara and Mr. Masloum Abdi signed in Damascus an 8-point agreement which, inter alia, spoke of integrating all civil and military institutions in northeastern Syria into the administration of the Syrian state. The agreement spoke of committees which have until no later than the end of 2025 to work and seek to implement these agreements. We have been encouraging progress on this track, and I welcome this agreement on shared objectives and the first follow-up that has taken place. We will continue and deepen engagement in support of this process. At the same time, Mr. President, we still see worrying signs that conflict in the northeast is not over yet. Exchanges of fire between the SDF and SNA factions have continued, and there were reports of Turkish airstrikes last week that hit SDF-controlled areas. Violence continues elsewhere too. Last week saw worrying cross-border clashes between Syrian and Lebanon after reports of kidnapping and execution of Syrian soldiers and firing of missiles into Lebanon. I welcome that Lebanese and Syrian authorities were able to contain and de-escalate the situation after 2 days of clashes and support all efforts for stronger dialogue between them. Meanwhile, Mr. President, February and March saw several incidents of reported Israeli airstrikes in southwest Syria, Damascus, Homs, and the coast. The IDF has also publicly confirmed it has built multiple positions in the area of separation, which are a violation of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. Such facts on the ground are not easily reversed. I am concerned by Israeli statements on the intention to stay in Syria for the foreseeable future, as well as demands for the full demilitarization of southern Syria. I appeal to the Security Council to hold Israel to its commitments that this is a temporary presence and stress that Israel must withdraw and respect Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence. The UN continues to engage Israel and the caretaker authorities to this end. Mr. President, on the all-important issue of the political transition, February saw a national dialogue conference take place in Damascus after 2 weeks of traveling consultations in regions. It produced a final outcome statement containing non-binding recommendations. In March, the caretaker authority issued a constitutional declaration, which I hope will move Syria toward restoring the rule of law and promoting an orderly, inclusive transition. Some Syrians have commented on the effort to fill the constitutional vacuum and noted the incorporation of international human rights norms as an integral part of the constitution, among other things. But others have expressed reservations about the non-transparent process of its drafting and the substance itself, particularly a very strong presidency with unclear checks and balances between state powers and ambiguity regarding the transition steps. I wish to inform the Security Council that my office was consulted informally and then formally towards the end of this process, and we gave advice, including conveying international best practices and norms. Some of this was taken on board, some was not. I believe we should build on this and deepen cooperation on the transition going forward. Mr. President, I will be returning to Damascus soon to continue my engagement. I would like to highlight several priority areas for your attention. First, Syrians await the announcement soon of a transitional government to be appointed by Mr. al-Shara and a transitional legislative council that is partially appointed by him and partially elected by a process to be determined by persons that he appoints. I believe Syrians will be able to tell whether the members of these bodies reflect the very diverse sources of competency and constituencies in Syria, both women and men. Second, early further moves are advisable on constitutional issues. Caretaker Foreign Minister al-Shibani has told me that the Constitutional Committee will be formed to prepare for a permanent constitution. This process, and then the securing of popular approval and preparing for free and fair elections, are extremely important undertakings. I look forward to further discussing the assistance of the United Nations that we can provide on these issues in support of a Syrian-led and owned process in line with my mandate and the core principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. Third, the atrocities laid bare the urgent need for credible and efficient accountability for crimes committed over so many years. Syrians have made clear that they seek not only prosecutions, but also a comprehensive process to address the right to truth, reparation, and safeguards against non-recurrence, the only true signal to end an era of impunity. The caretaker authorities are engaging with the independent institutions on missing persons, the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism, and the Commission of Inquiry, with whom we are in close coordination. We hope engagement will translate into real partnership, optimizing all international and Syrian resources and expertise, including within civil society. Fourth, Mr. President, a clearer way forward on security issues needs to be developed in a landscape of significant complexity and fragmentation. The goal that armed groups have committed to, one army with no weapons outside state control, cannot be achieved overnight or by declarations. An effective approach to comprehensive security sector reform and disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration is needed. The dissolution of the former army and security forces left hundreds of thousands without salaries and fearing exclusion. Meanwhile, many armed groups remain in possession of their weapons and have not yet integrated. Inclusive politics, resources, and vetting processes in line with international human rights obligations will all be essential alongside a genuine nationwide ceasefire. I encourage the caretaker authorities to seek support and partnerships, including with the United Nations, on these issues. Fifth, the issue of foreign fighters in the senior ranks of the new armed forces, as well as individuals associated with violations, remain a key concern to Syrians and internationally, as the Council recently made clear. I continue to urge the caretaker authorities to address this robustly. Sixth, Syrians need an economic future, and they need serious international support to enable this economic recovery. I welcome the humanitarian pledges at the 9th Brussels conference last week to support Syria's recovery and host communities in neighboring countries. But more resources will be needed to ensure that Syria does not fragment
and to further streamline procedures. And as I've made clear already here, we count on their continued support for further easing registration for humanitarian NGOs, especially as part of the humanitarian reset that I set out last month, as we're allocating a higher proportion of funding for Syrian partners who are truly at the front lines of this response.
To Ms. Jumana Saif.
Thank you, Mr. President. Shaila. After the fall of the Assad dictatorship, I moved to Damascus, marking my return in over 12 years of exile. I traveled through various neighborhoods, and I witnessed firsthand the staggering levels of poverty and the hardship, with severe shortages of electricity and even the most basic necessity of life. For decades, Syrians endured immense suffering under Assad's rule, which led to unilateral sanctions that affected not only the regime, but also ordinary citizens. Now that Assad is no longer in power, there is no justification for maintaining these sanctions. What Syrians need most is their immediate removal, alongside investments, reconstruction, and economic revitalization. Achieving this requires the concerted efforts of both the international community and the Syrian government. Syria stands at a historic crossroads with a rare chance to unite and to transition to democracy. I urge the international community to remove these sanctions so our country can finally move forward. As Syria faces ongoing crisis, the tragic violence in the coastal city has yet added to the challenges. It began with Assad regime remnants attacking security forces. The situation quickly developed into brutal massacres that targeted civilians with acts of revenge without discrimination. Unfortunately, reports of human rights violation continue, albeit at a reduced scale. What has happened has caused a real concern for us Syrians. After getting rid of the Assad regime, which committed the worst crimes, especially in the last 14 years, we don't want to build our new country on the back of a new massacre. We want to move forward in a state of justice and law, where all perpetrators and those who participated in the killing of Syrians by the Assad regime and the remnants of the outlaws will be held accountable, as President al-Shara promised in his speech on March 9th. He announced the formation of an investigation and fact-finding committee. We are waiting for the report to be released on April 9th. Today, more than ever, Syrians must create a transparent and inclusive national plan for transitional justice. This requires consultation with victims' associations and civil society to ensure fair trials, truth commissions, moral and financial compensation for victims, and safeguards to prevent future atrocities. All of this required significant financial resources and technical expertise. Here I urge the international community to provide these financial resources and support the rehabilitation of our judicial system, training its cadre of women and men, including justice, investigators, and law enforcement agencies, especially concerning crimes of sexual violence and crimes against women. Over the past 13 years, Syrian human rights and civil society organizations have worked tirelessly on human rights and transitional justice.
Give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Mr. Geir Peterson, and Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher. We thank them for their detailed briefings on the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. We also listened to the information which was provided by Jumana Saif. Since the time elapsed since December last, we have been able to see that the change of power in the Syrian Arab Republic unfortunately did not rid the people of this country from numerous humanitarian, socioeconomic problems and external threats. They remain relevant and they're even growing. Successful tackling the challenges the country is facing will determine to a large degree what the future of this Arab Republic will be, and therefore the Syrians are of vital need of a multilateral and depoliticized support from the international community. The situation in Syria today is characterized by continued economic decline and frequent outbreaks of violence. Data about the number of people in need, the situation when it comes to food security and healthcare show that putting the country back on the path towards sustainable development is only possible if there is an end to hostilities everywhere and if there is a reform undertaken. There is no alternative to that. Syrian people should finally receive the right for decent peace, life and well-being. Mr. President, a very worrying development for us was the continued clashes in Aleppo and the northeast of the country. They have taken lives of people and destroyed civilian infrastructure. But what was a real shock for all of us was a recent outbreak of violence in the coastal areas of Latakia and Tartus, where hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians died, Alawites, Christians, and other ethnic and religious minority representatives. This also provoked a new displacement of civilian people who were compelled to leave, sometimes outside of Syria. Social networks have a great deal of shocking information showing the crimes committed against civilians. And of course, the Security Council cannot ignore all of this. In this regard, we are grateful to all members of the Council for expeditiously agreeing a document which was undertaken on our joint initiatives with the American colleagues, the presidential statement which condemns the mass killings in Latakia and Tartus and emphasizes the need for a swift, transparent, independent, impartial, and comprehensive investigation in line with international standards so as to hold all perpetrators accountable. In this context, I would like to note that the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, sent a letter to the head of the Syrian state, Ahmed Shah, and in this letter he supports the efforts to stabilize the situation as quickly as possible to ensure its sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. And we hope that the measures undertaken by Damascus, including establishing a fact-finding and investigative commission for the coastal areas and also establishing a high committee for civil peace, will help stabilize the situation in the region. Of course, this is a priority in order to build a firm foundation for the new Syria, the kind of Syria where the rights of all ethnic and religious minorities will be guaranteed. And we count on receiving the information about that from the Syrian authorities and also count on their close cooperation with the Envoy in the context of the provisions we have in the presidential statement. The humanitarian situation in the coastal areas impacted, especially in the rural areas, remains very, very difficult. According to UNICEF, there is an acute shortage of food there. There's a limited access to vital services. School attendance remains at a very low level. And many civilians had to flee in search of personal safety. What we need to make sure is not just that the crisis doesn't spread further, but we also have to make sure that there is no persecution on representatives of ethnic and religious minorities who have been living on those lands. In the light of the recent events in Latakia and Tartus, we think it would make sense to enhance the UN work to extend assistance to the people living in the coastal regions, especially since, as far as we understand, there aren't major issues, there shouldn't be major issues with humanitarian assistance access. Damascus has been showing a constructive approach when it comes to interacting with humanitarians. Given this, we should perhaps be thinking about growing the OCHA presence in Latakia and Tartus, including possibly an opening up an additional OCHA sub-office there. Take into account that the process of humanitarian architecture reform in the Syrian Arab Republic has been launched. Such measures would help keep the situation under control and regularly assess the needs of the people and react to them immediately, including in case the situation worsens. Mr. President, we were following with concern the recent clashes on the border between Lebanon and Syria. In the course of those clashes, artillery was used and regular army units on both sides. We welcome the decision to have a ceasefire, which came out after a phone call between the Ministries of Defense of Lebanon and Syria. And we call upon Damascus and Beirut to undertake all of the steps necessary to prevent any further incidents on the border and to cut the risks of them growing uncontrollably. A no less destructive role is also played by continued Israeli airstrikes against the territory of Syrian Arab Republic and Israel's continued occupation of territory by West Jerusalem. We condemn the strikes by the IDF, as a result of which more than 20 people were killed and wounded in the south of Homs. And we call on West Jerusalem to return to upholding their obligations under the 1974 disengagement of forces agreements and to withdraw their units from the buffer area and other areas taken since December 2023 in Syria. The new Syrian leadership has stated many times that they are ready to build peaceful relations with all of its neighbors without exception. But Israel, through its action, has put paid to that and is strengthening those voices which are radical inside Syria. Such an approach in the long term is not going to help strengthen Israeli security. There is also a terrorist threat which remains in the country, and we call on Damascus to pay special attention to it and make sure that ISIL and other terror groups do not take root in Syria. We are particularly concerned by the issue of foreign terrorist fighters who have turned up there, including in the clashes in the west of the country, and decisive measures against them should be undertaken immediately. We note that on the 10th of March, there was a framework agreement signed in Damascus between Ahmed Shara and the commander of the SDF, Mazloum Abdi. It provides for the return of the Trans-Euphrates under central forces and the integration of Kurdish militarized units under into government forces. Good faith implementation of these agreements will help strengthen the unity of Syria and the threat and the trust by other ethnic religious minorities to Damascus, as they hope that their rights will be protected within the new Syrian state. We say here once again that the road to sustainable normalization in Syria lies through inclusive inter-Syrian dialogue aimed at national agreement, reconciliation, and advancing comprehensive political settlement in line with the basic principles we have in Security Council Resolution 2254. This process should be implemented through taking well-considered, balanced, and genuinely inclusive decisions, and they need to be met by moves on the part of the international community aimed at improving the economic situation in the country and heightening the quality of life of ordinary Syrians. We are convinced that the UN has to play a key role in accompanying a Syrian-owned and led political process. And we would like to express our full support to the efforts in this regard undertaken by the Special Envoy Geir Pedersen. Mr. President, in his message to Ahmed Shara, President of Russia Vladimir Putin reaffirmed our readiness to develop practical interaction with Damascus on all of the issues we have on our bilateral agenda so as to strengthen the traditionally friendly relations between our countries. And we hope that the Syrian people will be able to finally overcome all of the challenges the country is facing. Russia is extremely interested in seeing this done. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Federation of Russian Federation, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, for your briefings. We appreciate your ongoing efforts, particularly in the wake of the sectarian violence that swept over coastal regions in western Syria earlier this month. And thank you, Ms. Jumana Saif, for your briefing, including about your own story and about the indispensable role of women in Syria's political transition. On March 14th, this Council adopted a presidential statement that calls on the interim authorities to hold accountable the perpetrators of the mass killings in western Syria and enact further measures to prevent its recurrence. We expect the interim authorities to act on the Council's clear message. All parties in Syria must protect civilians from violence, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or political ideology. We look forward to the report early next month from the Independent Investigative Committee to examine all atrocities committed, with particular attention to reports of extrajudicial killings. It will also be important to see genuine efforts at reconciliation with the Alawite community from the Coastal Committee tasked with assisting the interim authorities' engagement. Interim authorities must also embark on a political process that includes Kurdish, Druze, Alawite, and Christian communities, something they have not meaningfully done to date. Only a truly representative process will reassure Syrians that they have a place in Syria's future. The United States reaffirms its support for a political transition that demonstrates credible, non-sectarian governance as the best path to avoid further conflict. We have concerns that the draft constitution framework that's we have concerns that the draft constitution framework is not headed in the right direction, and we are watching closely who is selected for cabinet positions. While we welcome the March 10th agreement with the Syrian Democratic Forces to integrate the Northeast into a unified Syria, real and meaningful progress will be defined by the details of implementation. The agreement is a modest first step in the pursuit of a stable and independent Syria. To be meaningful, this agreement must be finalized with details that include a unified state security structure that ensures Syria does not pose an external threat to neighboring states and is capable of defeating Syrian-based ISIS or other violent extremist groups, including Iranian-backed militias. Syria's security framework must include detailed plans to ensure, 1, that ISIS fighters remain in detention, and 2, that there is continued control of the large population of foreign ISIS terrorists currently contained by the Syrian Democratic Forces. We will see an insurgence of ISIS if this population of approximately 8,200 fighters escapes or is let free. On El Hol and Al Roj, we call on all nations that have citizens inside these camps to repatriate their nationals. It is time to depopulate the camps, which serve as incubators of terrorism, to prevent further radicalization of another generation of ISIS. Mr. President, actions meant to be significant signposts in Syria's ongoing transition have fallen short of expectations. We must remain clear-eyed about our outstanding challenges that are faced. Everyone, including Syria's interim authorities, knows much more can and needs to be done. For one, there must be expansive representation of Syrian voices on a new committee formed to draft the permanent constitution. Unless a representative committee is formed, Syria will fail and remain in the sectarian shadow of the Assad regime, increasing the likelihood of a new civil war. Foreign fighters have no role in Syria's military or governing institutions. This month's clashes in the coastal region, in which foreign fighters reportedly committed atrocities, were stark reminders of the seriousness of this threat. All foreign fighters need to be removed from their posts immediately, and military units comprised of foreign fighters must be disbanded. We condemn and are watching closely recent attempts by Hezbollah and their Iranian backers to create instability on the Lebanese-Syrian border. We call on the Syrian interim authorities and the government of Lebanon to cooperate and deconflict their military operations so that Iran-backed terrorists cannot regain a foothold in Syria. Finally, Mr. President, we encourage Syria's interim authorities to further engage with international organizations seeking to support the country's transition. In that regard, we note recent statements by the UN Secretary General and Special Envoy Pedersen expressing readiness to support a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition. We also welcome the recent engagement between the interim authorities and the OPCW. Technical teams must arrive soon to begin the work of identifying and destroying the Assad regime's chemical weapons program. Colleagues, Syria has arrived at a pivotal moment just 3 months since the fall of Assad. Recent events have underscored Syria's fragility and increased our concerns that interim leaders may not have moved beyond their jihadi pasts. We have seen the resilience of its people who endured 14 years of civil conflict and over 50 years of a regime's brutal rule. Advancing accountability and ensuring representative governance is key to an enduring peace and prosperity in Syria. In our capacity as Council members, we must speak with one voice in the coming days and months as Syrians seek to reunify their country and live in peace with their neighbors. The United States seeks peace and security in the region, a stable Syria that is free from external influence, respects the rights of all Syrians, and prohibits terrorists from using Syria as a platform. The United States urges this Council to help Syria realize these common objectives. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. And
thank you to the Special Envoy and the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Messrs. Pedersen and Fletcher, for your briefings that were particularly comprehensive. And Madam Saif, thank you for your testimony and for the years of resisting oppression. In December 2024, after years of fighting the dictatorship, the Assad regime is no more. The transitional phase that opened up has given rise to a number of hopes, but also concerns. The international community must stand alongside the Syrian people. This is the path that France has chosen. 4 priorities in this regard. First of all, put an end to violence. The massacres that we saw in the coastal region recently show that the risk of fragmentation of Syria is a reality. France has condemned these events, and it's now necessary that those responsible for the violence, whatever camp they are in, be brought to justice. This demand echoes the expectations for transitional justice to bring to justice of those that have committed crimes under Assad and since. And I welcome the presence of Madam Kinzela. In the northeast, the agreement signed between the interim authorities in Damascus and the Syrian Democratic Forces is a first step towards a negotiated solution for Syria and to guarantee the rights of the Kurds. The transition in Syria is taking place at a time when terrorism remains in the region. It's essential that Damascus fight this threat, particularly Daesh, and address the issue of foreign terrorist fighters. Also, the dismantling of the chemical weapons program and the cooperation with the IAEA are important expectations of the international community, and we welcome the first mission of the IAEA to Syria. Then, freedom for the Syrian people. The transition must respect the aspirations of the Syrian people. The roadmap that the Damascus authorities have committed to is clear: a peaceful, representative political transition of all components of the Syrian people, respecting Resolution 2254. France supports the efforts of Geir Pedersen to support this process. The United Nations has an important role to play in assisting the political transition underway, and we encourage the Syrian authorities, together with the UN, to build a relationship of trust, together with the support of the international community. At the Paris Conference on Syria on the 13th of February, the transitional authorities signed up to a declaration with specific commitments. The first results have been seen: the first holding of a national dialogue and the announcement of a provisional constitutional declaration. And we call for this dialogue to continue and involve all components of Syrian society without exception. And we call for the formation of a representative government recognized as legitimate by all Syrians. The participation of Syrian women in decision-making is also indispensable, as well as taking into account the interests of all the minorities: Christian, Shiite, Alawite, Kurdish. All these minorities represent the richness of Syria. Then support the political process and the economic recovery. Everyone knows that the suffering is great, the economy is in ruins, infrastructure is devastated. In order to support the political process, we must continue to work to guaranteeing humanitarian access, to assist the rebuilding of the country, and facilitate the safe, dignified and voluntary return of Syrian refugees and internally displaced. The European Union is committed in this regard. We have suspended certain restrictive measures in the economy, such as in energy and transport, in order to facilitate financial and bank transactions for the reconstruction. The 17th of March, the Brussels conference mobilized €5.8 billion for Syria and neighboring countries, 2.5 billion of which is from the European Union for 25 and 26. It is this coordination that will make it possible to converge around the common goal of Syria's stabilization and the much-needed activation of humanitarian aid. Finally, Mr. President, peace in the region. In an unstable regional environment, it's very important that there be stability. This includes resumption of dialogue with Lebanon on the common border and also cessation of activities in the Golan. We call upon Israel to stop bombing the area, withdraw from the area of separation of the 1974 agreement, and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Syria and Israel must take into account the security concerns of the other. France, Mr. President, for its part, will continue our support to efforts to rebuild Syria for the freedom for all Syrians and for regional stability and for the fight against terrorism. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for this statement, and I will give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
I thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria. The A3+ would like to thank Special Envoy Geert Pedersen and USG Tom Fletcher for their valuable briefings. We have also listened carefully to Mrs. Jumana Saif. Mr. President, at the outset, the A3+ reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. Syria that confronts today grave security, humanitarian, political, and economic challenges. These fundamental principles cannot be sustained in the absence of civil peace among Syria's diverse community and the cessation of external interference in the country's internal affairs. We reiterate our strong condemnation of the summary killings carried out recently in Syria's coastal provinces. It is imperative to emphasize that civilians, regardless of their background, must be protected under all circumstances, in line with international humanitarian law. The A3+ also reiterates its call for accountability and look forward to the report of the committee established by the interim authorities to investigate thoroughly the attacks and identify those responsible. Further compounding the security challenges are the ongoing IDF airstrikes against military sites in Syria's territory. Also are the alarming statements by Israeli officials about, I quote, the indefinite presence of their forces in Syrian territory and their intention to establish a demilitarized area in southern Syria, all of which violate Syria's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The A3+ condemns such irresponsible statements and actions which will only exacerbate regional instability. We stress that the Golan Heights is an occupied Syrian territory and reaffirmed by the Security Council Resolution 497. And we call for full respect for the 1974 disengagement agreement, including its provision regarding the area of separation. Mr. President, the challenges confronting Syria requires the full support and solidarity of the international community. The A3+ stresses the importance of building a Syria that is inclusive of all its citizens, free from any form of discrimination, and that embraces the aspirations of all Syrians. We believe that the establishment of a committee to promote civil peace and reconciliation, to promote and facilitate communication between communities is essential to achieving lasting peace in Syria. In this regard, mechanisms for truth-seeking, transitional justice, and community-based reconciliation, anchored in Syrian ownership, should be encouraged. The A3+ acknowledge the constitutional declaration made on March 13 and emphasize the need for an inclusive transition process in Syria. In this regard, the A3+ takes note of the agreement signed on March 10 by the leadership of the interim authorities and the SDF, and call for all actors to support a nationwide ceasefire. Differences should be resolved through dialogue, through negotiation, and the guns must be silenced to allow humanitarian access, to protect civilians, and to enable early recovery effort. The A3+ reiterate its support to the Special Envoy efforts to assist the interim Syrian Authority to organizing a political transition guided by an inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process, facilitated by the United Nations and based on the key principle outlined in Resolution 2254. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains catastrophic, and substantial efforts are required to improve it. All fields have been severely impacted by the crisis. To address these challenges, the Syrian people need the continued support and solidarity of the international community, including sustaining and unimpeding humanitarian access. The A3+ acknowledge the burden of prolonged displacement and underlines the need to prioritize social integration program for returnees, to also prioritize access to basic public services to ensure durable solution. The A3+ takes note of the pledges and commitments made during the Brussels conference on 17 March and hope that they will soon be fulfilled, and the humanitarian response plan will be fully funded. With one of the most severe displaced crises in the world, displaced Syrians both inside and outside the country, must be guaranteed safe, dignified, and voluntary return to their homes. While we note that more than 1.2 million IDPs and refugees have returned home since November 2024, obstacles to return remains. If we are sincere in our commitment in supporting Syria's transition, we must provide Syrians with the means to rebuild their country. Without rapid economic recovery, it will be difficult to envision a safe and prosperous future for Syria. In this regard, Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and Algeria firmly believes that the swift lifting of unilateral sanctions is essential. Mr. President, the situation in Syria remains volatile, and the international community stands at the crossroads between the hope for a brighter future and the fear of further descent into chaos in Syria. Let us do everything we can to help all Syrians, build the country they have long aspired. The Security Council must act with unity, with resolve, with humanity to support the Syria transition process and prevent a relapse into violence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And like others, I'd like to start by thanking Special Envoy Pedersen and Under Secretary General Fletcher for your briefings. I'd also like to thank Ms. Seif for your briefing and for your tireless advocacy efforts. We echo your calls for an inclusive political transition that prioritises the participation and leadership of women in Syria. President, I'd like to make 3 points today. First, this month, Syrians marked the 14th anniversary of the start of the uprising against the Assad regime. At last, they can see the prospect of a more stable and hopeful future. But horrific events this month demonstrate too that this remains a fragile and critical moment in Syria. We welcome the interim authorities' announcement establishing a fact-finding committee to investigate and prosecute individuals who committed crimes during the clashes in Syria's coastal areas. A peaceful and secure country is in the interests of all Syrians and the wider region. Diplomacy and dialogue are the best way of achieving this, and we urge all parties to refrain from further violence and to exercise restraint at this critical moment. We are concerned by Defence Minister Katz's declaration that the Israeli presence in the area of separation and the Golan Heights could be for an unlimited period. This is unacceptable, and Israel must present clear and reasonable timelines for their withdrawal in line with international law. Second, we note the progress made in Syria's political transition. We welcome the constitutional declaration's provisions on freedom of expression, religion, and women's rights, alongside the commitment to establish a Transitional Justice Commission. We call for swift implementation of these actions and hope the declaration will provide a solid foundation for a transition that guarantees the rights of all Syrians. A clear approach on accountability and transitional justice is essential for national reconciliation and to prevent a recurrence of the violence that we saw this month. Progress on this cannot wait. As the interim authorities take these next steps, we call for a consultative and inclusive process and for appointments to the transitional government to reflect Syria's rich diversity. Finally, we recognise the immense challenges of rebuilding Syria and that this cannot be done without economic recovery and the international community's coordinated support. The UK is committed to Syria's recovery, underlined by our pledge at last week's Brussels conference of up to $207 million in critical humanitarian assistance. This will alleviate some of the suffering in Syria, as well as helping Syrians in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, who generously host so many refugees. In parallel, the UK has relaxed some sanctions on Syria and revoked the asset freezes of 24 entities and institutions in the energy, transport, and finance sectors. We have also issued a general license to support transactions for humanitarian activities in Syria. In conclusion, President, the UK stands with the Syrian people in building a more stable, free, and prosperous future. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I welcome Foreign Minister Rasmussen presiding over today's meeting. I thank Special Envoy Patterson and USG Fletcher for their briefings. I also listened carefully to the statement by civil society representative Ms. Saif. China has been closely following the situation in Syria. We sincerely hope that with the help of the international community, Syria will steadily advance its political transition and restore peace and stability at an early date. In this connection, I wish to make the following points. First, an inclusive transition process should be advanced. In coastal areas of Syria, civilians were indiscriminately killed, the inhumanity and brutality of which is outrageous. The Syrian interim authorities have announced the launch of a one-month independent investigation to ensure accountability. We are following the progress in this regard. We hope that the Syrian interim authorities will carry out their relevant work in a transparent and responsible manner, which is crucial to the international community's assessment of the credibility of the political transition in the country. China takes note of the recent initiatives by the Syrian interim authorities to advance the political transition. It is our hope that they will earnestly deliver on their commitments. And guided by the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254, engage in broad dialogue and consultation with all sectors in Syria to achieve genuine inclusiveness. The work of Special Envoy Patterson should be respected and supported by all parties. The Office of the Special Envoy needs to strengthen its team on the ground. The League of Arab States can play a greater role in the Syrian political process. Second, The bottom line of countering terrorism should be preserved. Following the change in the situation in Syria, foreign terrorist fighters in Idlib have moved across Syria, posing an immediate threat to the Syrian people and to regional and international peace and security. FTFs have been involved in the mistreatment and the killings of civilians in the coastal areas. This is yet another reminder of the need to remain highly vigilant against the terrorist forces in Syria. The Security Council adopted a presidential statement this month, reaffirming its unified position against the foreign terrorist fighters. We urge the Syrian interim authorities to fulfill their counterterrorism obligations and to take decisive measures to combat all Security Council-listed terrorist organizations, including the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, also known as Turkestan Islamic Party. Third, active efforts need to be made to develop and improve people's well-being. With Syria's economy in a long-term stagnation, improving living conditions is the most pressing aspiration of over 20 million people. The Syrian interim authorities should take promoting economic development and improving people's livelihood as top priority. We call on traditional donors to increase their humanitarian assistance to Syria. Relevant countries should take measures to eliminate the negative impact of unilateral sanctions and ensure that the relevant measures play a positive role in alleviating the humanitarian situation and promoting sustainable development. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate that the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria should be respected. Golan is internationally recognized as occupied Syrian territory. The 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement should be complied with. China condemns Israeli airstrikes against Syria. Israel should withdraw from Syrian territory without delay. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I thank the representative of China for the statement, and now give the